Hey, as we continue your series on Jesus stories, we're going to look at three stories today. A story of a man with no answer, a woman without any credibility, and a beggar with a weird story. And it's all going to help us better understand how we can share our faith in a way that is neither weird nor intimidating. C.S. Lewis, the famous apologist, a brilliant professor in England who came to Jesus later in his life and became a great defender of the faith because of the perspective he had with his brilliance and with his many years of not being a believer. Wrote many books, Chronicles of Narnia, some of you have heard of, Mere Christianity, all kinds of books that have had huge influence. But perhaps one of the most famous phrases he has is simply this. His statement that Jesus was either a liar, a lunatic, or Lord. Because Jesus was incredibly clear when he said, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. You can't get more crystal clear than that. And as C.S. Lewis and others since then have noted, if he knew that wasn't true, but it was just part of his gig, well, then he's a liar. He ought not be worth one moment of our time, an absolute fraud. If it's not true, but he thought it was true, he's a lunatic. 5150, put him away. This is crazy. And if it's true, then it's probably the most important thing out there for us to understand and for us to share with others. But if truth be known, the problem is, there's a few Jesus followers out there that are so aggressive that they pretty much scare people off. I catch that impact in my own life, You go back a few decades, and if I'm on an airplane and they find out I'm a pastor, which, by the way, I do everything I can so you don't know I'm a pastor. Short of cussing, it's like, oh, I write books, I work with people, I consult, whatever, and then fine, in the conversation it might come out, well, specifically, where? What do you do? Well, I'm a pastor. Well, decades ago, they would then suddenly look for some way to connect. I have a brother who's a priest, or, whatever it would be, find some way to connect. You know what happens today, in the last 10 years or so? The headphones go on instantly, right? It's like end of conversation. And it's why? It's because sometimes we've just handled this important message so poorly. And those who do that often think we're cowards if we don't turn every conversation over to Jesus. Now, the flip side, where many of us, extrovert or introvert, land, is that we're a bit more intimidated, so we tend to stay silent, or we're rather awkward when it's time to share what we believe, because we think if we don't know the answer to everything, we probably shouldn't say anything. But the Bible's got a whole completely different model that's out there, and that's what we're going to unpack today. And I want to blow up kind of some of the myths about, and even guilt genes that some of us carry on our shoulder, about how we're supposed to share our faith and what we're supposed to do. Because, again, it's not that weird. Now, when I came to Jesus, there was kind of a movement that was going on across the country. So in my own life, I was a bit of a mixture of both. I was intimidated, didn't quite know what to share, but other times feeling guilty or the momentum of some things happening in the culture. If you breathed, I shared Jesus with you. And so at the end of the day, it was much more, it wasn't so much good news as it was a gong show and a dumpster fire. Actually, when it came to it. We had, one of the examples is there was a thing we called the beach bus. Any of you guys know Whittier, La Habra, Huntington Beach? Help me out if you know that area. Beach Boulevard starts from the bottom of the hill in La Habra and goes all the way to Huntington Beach. So what we would do is we would have a bus every Saturday, and we'd put, the little bench seats, so there'd be one Christian on every seat, and then we would pick up hitchhikers going down to Huntington Beach, back in the time where you could actually hitchhike and it felt somewhat safe. Well, that meant they had to sit next to one of us on the whole way down. And I can't tell you how many people I led to Jesus on the whole way down. It was an awful lot. I was very impressed with myself. But the fact is, I think most people, maybe all of them who prayed to receive Jesus, were really praying to shut me up. Okay? Because later on I got asked by somebody, I go, well, where are all these people you're leading to Jesus with this and some of the other things that I was doing? And I said, well, I don't know. That's God's problem. You see, what I was doing is get a lot of decisions, not to God's, but there were no disciples. And part of it because I didn't understand what God has called us to do. And these 3 stories will help us understand. It's really a pretty simple thing. Introvert or extrovert, you can do it all day long. And it is neither intimidating nor weird. We've made it that way with the books we read, the podcasts we hear, the speakers who are awesome, really good. Have you noticed it? Drive-by guillotines, then go home and just kind of leave us behind. So let's take a look at these stories. The first one is, all of them are going to be found in the Gospel of John. The first one is found in John chapter 1, and it's a story of a man with no answer. And if you digitally got a Bible or paper Bible and you want to go quickly there, you can go there. We're going to put kind of the key verses up on the screen. But what's happening in John chapter 1, there's 4 Jesus stories, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Each of them are historically completely true. They sometimes have some differences because each of them have a purpose for when they're telling the story and what they're trying to get across. So they'll leave something out or add based on that. And so John's Gospel's big emphasis is that Jesus is indeed God in the flesh. And so he doesn't give us a Christmas story or anything like that. He just starts with the ministry of Jesus. And it had been foretold in Old Testament prophecies that there was going to be one who would come before the Messiah, calling the people of God back to him and prepare the way for the Messiah. Now, his name was John the Baptist, not the author of the Gospel of John. That was the Apostle John, but John the Baptist. He was a cousin of Jesus, and he went out in the wilderness. He was wearing really weird clothes. He had a really weird diet, and his message was incredibly weird. It was that even though you were sons and daughters of Abraham, even though you've grown up in a God-fearing home, you are God's chosen people, you need to be right with God. To the men, he said, so what? You were circumcised on the outside on the 8th day after your birth, but your heart is not right with God. So he called them to a special baptism. It was a baptism for repentance, which means turning around and changing everything in a different direction. Well, that was scandalous to the Jewish leaders because they thought they were all right with God just by their environment, by their heritage and everything else. Well, to make it all the stranger, he keeps saying, I'm the herald, calling us to prepare the way for the one to come. Then Jesus shows up. It's the beginning of his ministry. He's lived, a sinless life up to then, but just a normal life pretty much normal life as far as anybody can see. But then he not only goes out to where John the Baptist is, he tells John, I want to be baptized. And John's like, knows who he is. He goes, you're the one, you need to baptize me. And Jesus says, no, I need to be baptized. It was his first step of his public ministry, identifying with our sin, which would go all the way to the end of his public ministry when his final words were, it is finished, which means paid in full on the cross, when the sins of the world were placed on his sinless shoulders. And he died for us. So it's step 1 of identifying. He comes out of the water. The Holy Spirit descends on him because he did his ministry, even though he's fully God, not in his godness. He set that aside. He was living as a real person. So he's going to be led of the Spirit in what he knew and what he did and the miracles that he did, etc. And so that has just happened. And a guy named Philip is there, and he saw the baptism. Maybe even heard the words when the Spirit descended on him, this is my son in whom I well pleased. And so what Philip did the rest of the day, he kind of snuck around and just came hanging around Jesus. Yeah, ever seen somebody that's trying to act like they're not following you, but they kind of are? Or someone, that's kind of, and finally Jesus turns around and says, what do you want, dude? Dude's in the Greek. It's like, what's up with this? And he says, where are you staying? And Jesus says, oh, come on, and takes him to wherever he was staying. And he spent the rest of the afternoon with this Philip guy who has just realized this is the Messiah. Well, now we pick up the story the day after his baptism. The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee, where he's going to do his ministry. And finding Philip, he said, okay, you come with me, follow me. Well, now, up on the screen, we've got verse 45. Philip found Nathanael and told him, we found the one Moses wrote about in the law, about whom the prophets also wrote. The Messiah, I know who he is. He's Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. And Nazareth is what Philip said? Can anything good come from there? And Nathanael said, come and see. Philip said, come and see. Well, imagine somebody from New York City, Manhattan, or Hollywood, or downtown L.A., and they've heard the new one has finally come, and he's from Vista, Ramona. It's like, where in the Bible does it talk about anything good coming from this little podunk town called Nazareth in that day? Nowhere. So he's like, well, how can the Messiah come from Nazareth? And I want you to know, Nathanael was completely convinced that Jesus was the Messiah, but his answer was, I haven't got a clue. It's like, good question. And what did he simply do? He said, well, why don't you just come and see for yourself? Hold on to that, because that's going to be so important and so simple. So the passage goes on and says, so Nathanael comes with Philip to see, and as he's coming, Jesus sees Nathanael approaching, and he says of him, he goes, here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. And very humble Nathanael goes, how'd you know me? That's pretty good. And Jesus says, well, I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you. And he goes, oh my God, literally, oh my God. You are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. How did Philip get Nathanael to understand who Jesus was? By simply saying, come and see. I want you to note some things that we're going to see in a few moments. 3 little things I want to point out to you. Number one, Nathanael was spiritually interested. Philip didn't go to somebody uninterested spiritually. He was spiritually interested. That's why they had gone out into the wilderness. You know, there was no Uber or Lyft to take you there. You didn't have your own wheels. It was a non-mobile culture. You had to walk there. It was a big deal to get out and see this John the Baptist dude and what he was doing. So he was spiritually interested. Second, Philip was completely convinced that Jesus was the Messiah, but he had no idea how to answer Philip's question. And the third thing I want you to see is he simply said, come and see. And once Nathanael came and saw, Jesus took it from there. Nathanael didn't know how to answer a question. Nathanael didn't know how to close a deal. He didn't know how to say, well, why don't you just come and see for yourself? And Jesus took it from there. That's the first story. The second ones will be a little bit quicker because I'm laying the foundation of this first one. But the second story is a woman with no credibility. She's known as the woman at the well. To begin with, she was a Samaritan, and the Jews and Samaritans had nothing to do with each other. And over in the story of the Good Samaritan, this story, Jesus kept breaking down the barriers that people had between one another. But the important thing for what we're seeing today is even in her own town, which was Samaritan, so that wasn't a problem to them, but even in her own town, she had 2 problems of credibility. One, she was a woman. And number 2, she'd been married 5 times, and now she was shacked up with dude number 6. Okay. So, to understand, she was a woman. Back then, in a different day and age, women were not allowed to testify in a court of law because they were not considered trustworthy. It always blows me away how Jesus was breaking the norms of culture consistently because in this case, he's not only talking to a Samaritan, he's talking to a woman who has been married 5 times, now living with that is not who the rabbis hung around. But he's doing that. And then later on, think about it. When Jesus was resurrected, who were the first people he showed himself to? Talk to me. North Coast does, okay? So help me out. Who were the women? Who were the people? I gave you the joke, right? Gave you they were women. And then they went back, and that's who Jesus chose to be the first ones and to carry his message. So he's constantly breaking the norms of that culture. But still, in that Samaritan village, she was a woman. Nobody's going to listen to her. Well, as Jesus talked to her, she just became more kind of blown away by the answers, so she kept trying to divert the subject somewhere else. And she asked something else, and Jesus just looks at her and says, "You've been married 5 times. The guy you're living with is not your own husband." And she's like, "Oh, my God," literally. How's he know that? And now we pick up the story. John 4:28-40. Then, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to her town, and she said to the people, "Come see a man who told me everything I ever did." Like, he knows things you should not know. Could this be the Messiah? I want you to see in the progression of these stories. Philip was convinced, and he said, "Come and see." She's wondering, it seems like this might be the Messiah. But what'd she say? She does, "Come and see." Could this be the Messiah? So what'd they do? They came out of the town and they made their way towards him. And then you jump down a bunch of verses to verse 39. It says, many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of, circle, highlight, underline that phrase, because of her wonderful, deep explanation of who Jesus was. No, because she said, this guy knows things you shouldn't know. It is weird. Why don't you just come and see? Because of the woman's testimony when she said, he told me everything I ever did. So a highly convinced Philip, I don't know, could this be the Messiah, woman at the well, to now the story of a beggar with a story. This was a man who was blind from birth. It's found in John chapter 9. He's blind from birth, and he's sitting there like they did every day, kind of like on the freeway today, right? You know, asking for the money, whatever. But these were all like legit blind or had their issues there. And so they would call out every day, and he's calling out to Jesus and to others, asking for a handout. But Jesus decides to give him a healing. What he does is he walks over to the man, he bends down, picks up some mud, spits in it, rubs it in the guy's eye, and the guy's like, what's up with this? I mean, you know, we read the whole story knowing the ending. It's very different. Imagine you're a fly on the wall and you don't know what's going on. Like, what is this rabbi doing? He spit on it, rub it in the guy's eye, and then the guy washes it out, but suddenly he can see. So he wanted, like I said, a handout, but what he got was a healing. But there was one problem. Jesus did it on the wrong day. From Friday sundown to Saturday sundown was called the Sabbath, a day of rest. Now, the religious leaders had totally jacked that up, just like the church I grew up in had totally jacked that up. And they made the Sabbath a day in which you could have no fun. You weren't supposed to do anything significant. It was just like, you know, God gives you 6 good days and you owe him 1 boring day. But if you actually read through the Bible, the Sabbath was just a day of rest. That's all it was. He said you don't work. And so in an agrarian society where when it's time to plant, you plant until everything's planted. And when it's time to harvest, you don't take one moment off, sunrise to sundown. You're working every day. He said, no, every 7th day I'm your union steward. You're getting a day off. And here's my promise to you. If you take that day off, you're still going to harvest as much as all those people who work 24/7. Promise it. Well, over time, as we always do, we take God's thing and turn him into something so we can show off. And over time, the religious leaders had decided, well, it's not just a day of rest. No, and by the way, let me show you one other thing on day of rest. Some of you might be familiar, like you weren't even allowed to cook on that day. It wasn't because God didn't want you to do anything. It was everything was from scratch. It was like an all-day chore. So he said on the day before, you make double so you can relax on this day, not because you can't do anything. Well, the religious leaders had decided, well, if you can't work, it's not just rest, it's somehow more on limits. So they started adding more and more things to it. And for instance, you were not able to heal if you were a doctor on the Sabbath because that's your job, that's your work. Your animal falls in a hole, you can help the animal out, but a human being has a need. Sorry, you got to wait 24 hours. Kind of like medicine today if you don't go to urgent care, right? You got to wait till the weekend's over. And so when Jesus heals them on the Sabbath, the religious leaders are terribly upset. So they asked the man who had received his sight what happened. And he said, well, he put mud in my eyes, and I washed, and now I see. The passage goes on and says, well, they didn't believe that he had been blind and had received his sight, so they sent for the man's parents. And they said, well, we know he's our son, and we know he's born blind, but how we can see now or who opened his eyes, we haven't got a clue. Ask him. He's of age. He's going to speak for himself. So they gathered him together a second time, and they summoned the man who had been blind, and they said, give glory to God by telling the truth. That's like a kind of an oath of that era. You know, when I was a kid, cross my heart, hope to die, stick 1,000 needles in my eye. That meant what I was going to say was absolutely true. So what he's doing here is they're saying, cross your heart, hope to die. You're like, we need the truth. And they said, tell us what actually happened, because we know this man, this rabbi, he's a sinner. Well, the man born blind said this, and let's put it up on the screen. Whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. I have no clue who this dude is. I'm blind. I'm a beggar sitting there. And he comes by, puts mud, now I see. I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see you. And it wasn't until Jesus later on explained to him who he was that then the man said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. Philip, convinced he's a Messiah. The woman at the well, could this be? To the man born blind, I have no idea who the heck this dude is. He could be the worst sinner ever. I just know that I now see. All three stories have a common thread. And what is their common thread and common theme? All three simply told their story and nothing more. I want you to catch that, because I always thought there was so much more that I had to do. They just told their story, which is never weird and is never intimidating. And by the way, our story is one thing no one can argue with, right? You can't argue with me that that's not my story. Oh, you weren't really blind, or you don't really, whatever it would be. It's simple. And we all pretty much know our story inside out without having to check the notes. Okay. I was taught as a brand new believer that what I needed to do is get this stuff to a whole different level. And to get this stuff to a whole different level, I even had a list of 21 of the most common questions that people ask. And I was supposed to memorize it and hold on to it and, kind of cheat sheet there. All I had to really do is just tell my story. So here's what I want to do in the rest of our time. I want to walk us through, as if we've heard these three stories like we have, and now we're heading to our favorite coffee shop, sitting down, have a cappuccino or macchiato or whatever it is you want. And we're saying, well, how does this work on Monday at work, in my neighborhood, the traveling squad with the other parents that we are hanging around? How does this happen? So let's pick it up from there. By the way, you've got a light shining on my, did you know that's? Okay, sorry, no problem. I'm going blind. I got a little laser in my eye. Thank you. So I want to talk about 5 simple things to keep in mind when you and I are trying to share with people, family, whatever it is, where we rub shoulders with people who we want to see come to know Jesus, but we don't quite know how to get there. So you ready? 5 simple things to keep in mind. Number 1, keep it simple. Keep it simple. Our goal is not to be profound. Our goal is to be clear. And part of the problem when I carried around those 21 answers, 18 of which I memorized, the other 3 I had to cheat. But what happened is it was me showing off my knowledge and my intelligence as if I was debating or arguing someone into following God. And it's really supposed to be simple. Jesus one time even prayed to the Heavenly Father. He said, Father, I thank you that you've hid these things from all those who arrogantly are following you and think they're brains on a stick that know everything, and you have revealed it to little children. The story is told of a theologian, a well-trained theologian, who went on the mission field. And he was asked to speak, and his opening words were this: I want to talk to you today about the transcendent but ever-present God. We serve him because he's the propitiation we need for our sins and the eschatological hope of the world. And they're like, and the translator looks at him like that. And here's what he said. He turned to the crowd and he said he's glad to be here. And that was a great translation. Simple, simple, simple. If it's not simple, you're not doing a good job. Every one of the come and sees is about as simple as it could be. But here's the second one. It's really important and hard for us to do today. Stay focused on Jesus. Stay focused on Jesus. I'm the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. If that's true, that's the most important thing. But it's so easy to get sidetracked by detours. You know, I'm a geographical moron. Any of you geographical morons? Like, if there's not ocean and hills, I don't know where I am, north, south, east, or west. When I travel to speak somewhere and I get home, my wife is always shocked that I got home. Also mildly disappointed, but that's another issue. But there are these times, and I'm sure I'm not the only one here, that I just trust my gut more than I do the GPS. And every time I do that, I get lost, right? Because the most important thing is where I'm going, and it's telling me how to get there. Well, we know the most important thing is Jesus, but suddenly we get tempted to take what looks like a detour that'll get us there faster, and it never does. Let me tell you 4 of the detours. The first one that is so enticing is arguments about morality. Arguments about morality. I was a journeyman retail clerk when I was putting myself through college and seminary. And so during those years, especially when I worked night crew, let's just say my life was very different as a new Jesus follower than the guys and gals that I worked with. And so I can't tell you how many times I got sucked into an argument about why I did what I did or didn't do what they did. And it was an absolute waste. But I thought I was like defending God, because if somehow I could get them to go, oh, you're right, and to change the way they lived, I was bringing them to God. But I wasn't. I was putting the cart before the horse. Nowhere are non-Christians expected to live like Christians. But that's what I was trying to do. Convince them why the Christian life choices are better, and they are better. A bunch of those people are dead now because of the choices they made. But if I got them to suddenly buy into my moral standard that we argued about, all I was doing was populating hell with more moral people. In fact, I was probably more often than not going to be making it harder for them to come to Jesus, because they'd be going, I don't need Jesus. I'm a really nice guy or gal. The Bible actually says this. There's a passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul's letter to the Corinthians, where there was one of their church members was living in just unbelievable debauchery and sexual sin. And Paul writes and says, what are you guys doing to a brother who's living this way? You're acting like there's no big deal. Just glad you're here. You need to deal with that. But then he says this, but what business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God's going to judge those outside. He's going to deal with it. It's not my job to make the world more moral. That's Jesus' job. I say, come and see. I lead them to Jesus. And then he starts to change them. The second dead-end detour that can be so enticing, looks like a shortcut to get where we want to go, is arguments about politics. Have any of you noticed we're kind of a divided culture in that area? Just wondering, right? Politics are important. I want to be quite clear about this. Especially in a culture where we have a voice and a vote. They're incredibly important. But they are not the hope of the world. And, and if everything politically was done in line with biblical values, that doesn't solve the problem of our sin and separation from God. Oh, it might make a better country, but that's not the big issue that we have to deal with. And I want you to hear me. We are so blessed to live in a culture. Most people have never lived in a society where they had a voice and a vote. And we need to use it or not. We shouldn't be complaining about what happens in our world. But at the end of the day, win or lose, we still win. 100% of the time. You're aware of that, aren't you? And at the end of the day, as important as politics might be, it's completely secondary to people coming to Jesus. And every time I fall into the trap of arguing about politics, I actually lose my opportunity to talk about Jesus because people just divide instantly. I have asked this question of 5,000 plus pastors, and this is not pastor math. This is a real 5,000. I've asked them, have any of you ever preached on a hot button issue? When it was hot, there's nothing you avoid when you're a pastor or teaching scripture. But when it was totally hot and it's front page of the news, have any of you ever gone after it right then and had somebody come up after the service and say to you, "Thank you, Pastor, you changed my mind"? Out of 5,000 people, you know how many have said they have? 0. I've yet to see a hand raise. And so I'll tell them, then why are you doing it now? Truth is important, but when the truth is said really matters. For instance, would you all agree a blessing is a good thing? Help me out. Did I give you a blessing? Okay. What if I do it at 4 a.m.? See, Proverbs says a blessing too early in the morning is going to be received as a truth. As a curse. The idea is these things can be important, but if nobody's listening, this is not the time and place to do it. You know, Jesus in his inner circle, it was astounding who he put in his inner circle. He had somebody named Matthew the tax collector and Simon the zealot, and they were part of his inner entourage of 12. We call them apostles. I want you to understand who they were. Matthew was a Jew who collected taxes from his fellow Jews to give to the Roman oppressors. And then he tacked on extra for himself. Simon the Zealot was part of a guerrilla warfare against the Roman oppressors. If you were a zealot and you ran into a Roman soldier on a dark alley all alone, that Roman soldier is dead. They were insurrectionists. I mean, there was no one they hated more. There was one group of people they hated more than the Romans, and they were the sellout Jews who helped the oppressors. And Jesus put them both in his inner circle. And I know he made them room together on road trips. Absolutely. And I think his large crowds were not because he healed the blind and raised the dead. I think it was like, who is so powerful they can get Matthew and Simon the Zealot to bow the knee. You see, it's all about Jesus. And whenever I give the impression it's about something else, people don't listen to Jesus. And you do realize the greatest God of our world today in our culture, and we're part of that culture, is politics. As Christians, we're no different. Let me show you how powerful that is. You go back a number of decades, and, you know, a Baptist wouldn't want to hang around a Methodist. Or a Catholic, or what, you know, there were all these little divisions. Well, nowadays, all of us know people that have married across faith lines and denominational lines, right? We know that left and right. But for the last 15, 20 years, do any of you who know somebody who married across political lines? My bet is none of you. So if that has become the new most important value in our culture, why in the world do we, around the Thanksgiving table with our extended family, at the workplace or in the neighborhood, do we lead with that when we're trying to help people come to know Jesus? Again, I'm not saying it's unimportant. You know, there was a time that the era was known as the year of the evangelicals. It was after a national election in which a lot of evangelical, Bible-believing people in the political realm had influenced things, and that election in Congress and president and everything went the way they were pushing. And a guy named Erwin Lutzer tells the story of a friend who was interviewed at that point. Let me read this to you. He had a friend who was interviewed by a reporter that was doing a story on the, quote, Christian right that had just come to power. And the journalist had interviewed 40 high-profile Christians. 40 of the people that back then, it was radio, not podcast, articles, magazines. They were the key leaders who were Bible-believing Christians in that realm. And this gal had interviewed 40 of them. And at the end of this last interview, Lutzer's friend asked, well, has anybody explained the gospel to you? And the reporter said, the gospel? What is that? You see, they'd gone down the detour. She had interviewed 40 of the most influential Christian leaders in America at that point. And she had no idea yet what the gospel was, but she knew exactly how they stood on every issue. We've got to be careful. Again, please hear me. I'm not saying they're unimportant, but I'm saying when I'm trying to bring people to Jesus, that's the last detour I want to go down. Two others real quick, just because they're on your note sheet, and some of you will go like that all week if I don't fill them out. But the second one is end-time speculation. Every time something's happening in Israel, there's a bunch of Christians who are convinced this is a final sign Jesus is coming, and we try to lead people to Jesus by scaring the hell out of them, literally. Well, the problem is for 2,000 years, we've all looked like idiots. Somebody's going to get it right and go, hey, I told you, you know. But, you know, that's not the way people come to Jesus that stick. And the last one is hard sell pressure. We can't argue people in the kingdom. It is not doing any good to send your wayward son or daughter, you know, here's a link to Chase's latest sermon. It's like they don't care. Nagging and hard sell never works. And that leads to number 3. Answer when asked. Answer when asked. You and I are to look for and wait for open doors, because knocking down doors is not a sign of spiritual courage. It's a sign of low emotional intelligence. And what's an open door? Well, it's pretty clear. An open door, I recognize every time. They go, tell me more. Non-verbally or verbally, they go like this. What's a closed door? This. They change the subject. They put their headphones on. It's like, time to end. Not reach over, hey, I'm not done yet, and it's a 3-hour flight. Nobody going to go, well, fall underneath, what must I do to be saved? They'll call the steward and say, get rid of this bozo. Did you know Jesus actually told his disciples to move on if somebody didn't want to listen? He sent out 12 at one point, 72 at another point as kind of an advanced team of the cities he was going to. And he said, if they welcome you, you stay there, you pray for them, you teach them, you do miracles, healing, whatever it would be. But if they don't want anything to do with you, he said, well, set up camp, get a blowhorn and a box to stand. No. He said, shake the dust off your feet and go somewhere else. Because we should never confuse saying and posting true words with actually spreading the truth. Right? Oh, I gave a blessing, but it was 4 a.m. Fourth, earn the right to be heard. We need to earn the right to be heard. And then people will ask. If I haven't earned the right to be heard, they're not going to ask, and I'm going to be answering questions they don't have. And how do we earn the right to be heard? By the way we live. Like no one, have you ever been convinced to change your mind on something by somebody you thought didn't like you or you didn't like? No. If the coworkers think of me as a jerk for Jesus, it's like, I don't listen to people. You don't listen to people. Because the gospel is made up of both words. The good news of Jesus is made up of both words and music. If there's a song and it's got great lyrics but bad music, I change the channel, don't you? And yet, how many songs have lame lyrics but great music and they become an earworm? I can't even get rid of it, right? Let me just show you how important the ambiance around everything is. There's this song that amps up our kids towards Christmas. Santa Claus is coming to town. Familiar with that? You know, better watch out, you better not cry. Kids are wired. But what if it went like this? True words, but went like this. You better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout, and I'm going to tell you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. He's making a list and he's checking it twice. He's going to know who's naughty or nice. Santa Claus is coming to town. He sees you when you're sleeping. Like, nobody liked Christmas. Would you agree? And that's what I mean by earning the right to be heard. Who I am is the music. Who you think I am in the good sense is the music. And great music with lame words, even if it's come and see, makes a difference. All the answers in the world with bad music, they try to change the channel. I love this because it's so easy. I can tell my story, and the moment I'm over my skis, I don't have to pretend I got everything. I just say, I don't know. Why don't you come and see? And that leads to the fifth point. We leave the final results to God. That's so freeing. If those of you in sales or marketing, you know the phrase, close the deal. I always thought that if I was a good Christian, I would close the deal. And if all I did was say, come and see, I really, that's because I'm like a low-class Christian. No. It's not my job to close the deal. It's Jesus' job to close the deal. I used to think it didn't matter. If I didn't get you to pray the prayer, I hadn't done my job. No, I just got to bring you to Jesus. And we saw over and over, he takes it from there. There are studies that show people need normally young adult to an adult comes to Jesus needs at least 5 encounters with the gospel before they make a decision. And what I've learned is sometimes it's just my job to be one of those 5. And I've learned my goal isn't to get you all the way there, but sometimes it's just to move you one step along as we move the needle. Put up on the screen this little picture, atheist to apostle. So you got -3, you got a Satan worshiper. You got +3, you got an apostle. Well, sometimes I've done a great work if all I've done is moved you from -3 to -2. I know sometimes I'd be in a work situation when I was in the marketplace, and I was sometimes maybe the first Christian they'd ever met that wasn't weird. That was awesome. I got them to -2. Do you see how easy this is? Just represent Jesus well. Just tell whatever the heck it is you know. Don't worry about what you don't know. And watch and see what Jesus does. 3 Jesus stories that show us how to tell our story. It's not so hard, and it's incredibly powerful. Thanks, and God bless.